Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the two temples of Abu Simbel. These two temples are considered to be among the very important and magnificent temples in the history of the ancient Egyptian architecture, and they are actually by far my favorite temples. The lecture will include an introduction about the two temples, and it will include a study of what is known as the Great Temple of Abu Simbel. We're going to discuss its facade and its interior design as well as its decoration. So let's go and start the presentation. The two temples of Abu Simbel were built by King Ramesses II, one of the very important kings of the 19th dynasty. King Ramesses II was known as Usr Ma'at Ra Setep in Ra. His name was recorded among the important kings who actually rebuilt the ancient Egyptian empire after it was destroyed by his successor, King Akhenaten. King Ramesses II ruled Egypt for a period of 67 years. During which he made a huge building program. And among the very important temples that he actually constructed were the two temples of Abu Simbel. These two temples are located today at an area known as Abu Simbel. It is around 280 kilometers south of Aswan. The two temples were constructed, carved into the sandstone mountains of Abu Simbel, overlooking the Nile River. Ramesses II made two temples, one for himself and one for his beloved wife Nefertari. Today, these two temples are known as the Great Temple and the Small Temple. The two temples were constructed very close to each other, only 150 meters apart, as they were made by King Ramesses II as a token for his eternal love for his beloved wife Nefertari. And so the two temples acted as a witness for the love story between Ramesses II and Nefertari, showing his eternal love for her. This slide here shows a photo of the original location of the two temples of Abu Simbel that were hewn in the sandstone mountains of Abu Simbel, overlooking the Nile River. As you can see, the two temples are magnificently decorated and are very close to each other, as they were meant to be constructed that way as a witness for the love story between Ramesses II and his great royal wife, Queen Nefertari. The Great Temple of Abu Simbel was not like any other temple in the history of ancient Egyptian architecture. In fact, it is considered to be a phenomenon due to the fact that the ancient Egyptian architects, who were also great engineers and great astronomers, were able to allow the sun to enter into the heart of the sanctuary and shine the statues carved inside only twice a year. Once during the coronation day of King Ramesses II, which was on the 21st of February, and once during his birthday on the 21st of October. This great temple had several names. It is known as the Southern Temple due to the fact that it lies to the south of the Small Temple. It was also known as the Temple of Ra Horokhti, as this temple was dedicated for the worshipping of god Ra Horokhti. The third and final name for the temple is the Temple of Ramesses II, not only because it was built by King Ramesses II, but actually because Ramesses II was worshipped as a god inside the temple. Inside this temple, Ramesses II was identified with god Ra Horokhti and worshipped, which means that in the Great Temple of Abu Simbel, Ramesses II was not only a king, but he was also a priest and a god. As for the Small Temple, it also had several names. It was known as the Northern Temple as it lies to the north of the Great Temple. It was known as the Temple of Hathor, Lady of Ibshik, as Hathor was worshipped inside the temple. Hathor had so many different titles. Among these were the Lady of the Sycamore and Lady of the Turquoise, but she was also known as Lady of Ipshik. Ipshik is a region that is located south of Abu Simbel in Sudan. The third and final name of the temple was the Temple of Nefertari, as Queen Nefertari was identified with Goddess Hathor and worshipped as a goddess inside the temple. This tradition was actually started by King Amenhotep III, who was the first king to make a temple or construct a temple for his wife to be worshipped. He made a temple for Queen T to be worshipped as Hathor Tefnut in Nubia. The same tradition was continued by his successor, King Ramesses II, who made a temple for his wife to be worshipped as a goddess. And so Nefertari was identified with Goddess Hathor and worshipped inside her small temple. In the year 1960, Gamal Abdel Nasser announced the starting of a huge program, which was the building of the Aswan High Dam and its reservoir, Lake Nasser. This only meant that the level of the Nile River would increase and submerge all the temples that were originally built behind the high dam. And among these temples were the temples of Abu Simbel. And so the UNESCO had to make a call to try and protect and save the two temples of Abu Simbel, which were not only considered to be an Egyptian heritage, but were rather looked upon as the world's heritage. And due to the UNESCO's call, the best engineers in the world sent proposals to the Egyptian government on how the two temples of Abu Simbel could be saved. The Egyptian government chose the Italian proposal, which actually proposed that the two temples would be cut into pieces and transferred to a higher ground where they could be reassembled, definitely protecting them from the Nile water flooding. This slide is representing the upper part of the facade of the Great Temple of Abu Simbel. It actually shows the cavetto cornelius, which is decorated by the cartouches of the king. Also, above the cavetto cornelius, you can see a line of the baboons, which are raising their hands in adoration for the sun. Under the cavetto cornelius is the line of hieroglyphic inscriptions giving names and titles of King Ramesses II. Blocks, they started reassembling the two temples again and recreating everything. They even recreated the mountains in which the two temples were once carved. Not only that, but they constructed a concrete dome on top of every temple so as to protect the temple from collapsing. And then these concrete domes were covered by sandstone blocks to give the old effect of the original temples. This slide here shows a photo of the Great Temple of Abu Simbel, or the Temple of King Ramesses II, while being cut into pieces. Even the four statues that were decorating the facade were cut into several parts that were transferred to the new ground by means of cranes and levers. It took a lot of hard work in order to be able to transfer the two temples, as the program continued for 4 consecutive years. 4 consecutive years of hard work, engineers and hundreds of Egyptian workers working days and nights to try and transfer the two temples safely to their new location. This next slide here shows the Great Temple of Abu Simbel, or the Temple of King Ramesses II, in its new location after it has been successfully transferred to the new location, and it shows how the Italian engineers were able to recreate the facade with the 4 colossal statues. They even recreated the mountains in which the two temples were once carved. Indeed, the two temples were transferred safely into their new location. Everything was recreated. However, And despite all the technology, efforts, and tools that were used by the best engineers in the world, they couldn't duplicate what the ancient Egyptian engineer, architect, and astronomer during the reign of King Ramesses II was able to do. As the best engineers in the world with their modern technology missed by one day. Today, the sun shines inside the temple one day after the king's coronation day and one day after his birthday, which means that the sun penetrates into the heart of the sanctuary to shine the statues carved in the sanctuary on the 22nd of October and on the 22nd of February instead of on the 21st of October and 21st of February, which shows how the ancient Egyptian engineers, architects, and astronomers were actually a phenomenon. And now we're going to discuss the Great Temple of Abu Simbel. We're going to discuss its facade and its interior design. The facade of the Great Temple of Ramesses II takes the trapezoid shape, imitating the pylon. It measures around 38 times 33 meters. It is decorated by 4 colossal statues of King Ramesses II carved on either side of the entrance. These colossal statues represent the king in a seated position. Between the legs of the colossal statues of Ramesses II are 12 little statuettes of his family members, representing especially his women, wives, and children. The slide here shows the facade of the Great Temple of Abu Simbel, representing the entrance, which is right in the middle between the 4 colossal statues that represent King Ramesses II seated with all signs of royalty, 2 on either side of the entrance. As you can see, the king is represented wearing the Nemes headdress, which is topped by the double crown and the uraeus on his forehead. He's represented wearing the false royal beard and the shindit royal kilt. Both his hands are placed flat on his knees and he is represented barefooted on the pedestal. Between the legs of the king, you can see the small statuettes that are representing the women of King Ramesses II, meaning his wives and his daughters. This slide here gives a closer look to the 12 statuettes that were represented between the legs of the 4 colossal statues of King Ramesses II. They actually represent his wives and daughters. On top of the facade, you can see a cavetto cornelius bearing the cartouches of the king. Above the cavetto cornelius is a row of 22 baboons, which are considered to be worshippers of the sun. Under the cavetto cornelius is a line of hieroglyphic inscriptions giving names and titles of King Ramesses II. This slide is representing the upper part of the facade of the Great Temple of Abu Simbel. It actually shows the cavetto cornelius, which is decorated by the cartouches of the king. Also, above the cavetto cornelius, you can see a line of the baboons, which are raising their hands in adoration for the sun. Under the cavetto cornelius is the line of hieroglyphic inscriptions giving names and titles of King Ramesses II. Above the entrance, which is located between the 4 colossal statues of King Ramesses II, there is a recess, a rectangular recess, which contains a statue for god Ra-Horachti, to whom the temple was dedicated. Ra-Horachti actually takes the human body and has a representation of the head of a falcon surmounted by the solar disk. He's holding in his right hand a representation of the Usr scepter, while on his left hand he's holding the Ma'at sign. Together, it could be read as Usr Ma'at Ra, which is the coronation name of King Ramesses II. On either side of the recess, there is a representation of King Ramesses II while raising his hands in adoration to the statue of Ra-Horachti, as Ramesses II here is represented as a priest worshipping himself as the god. This slide here shows the oblong recess that is immediately on top of the entrance, which contains the statue of god Ra Hor Akhti, identified by the solar disk above his head. It also shows two figures of Ramesses II while adoring Ra Hor Akhti, with whom he is identified, which means that Ramesses II is worshipping himself as god Ra Hor Akhti. This slide gives you a closer look to how Ra Hor Akhti was represented in the oblong recess above the entrance. As we said, he's represented in the body of a human, represented left leg stepped forward, as he is in fact King Ramesses II. He's also represented with the head of a falcon, on top of which it is surmounted by the solar disk, and he's holding in one hand the Usur sign, and in the other hand he's holding the Ma'at symbol. As together they are being read as Usur Ma'at Ra, which is the coronation name of King Ramesses II, identifying Ra Hor Akhti with King Ramesses II. This slide here shows the interior design of the temple. As you can see, right in front of the temple, near B, there is a representation of the solar chapel. And near A, there is another chapel which is dedicated for the worshipping of god Tot. The entrance to the temple leads to two halls, which in turn leads to the sanctuary. The first hall is known as the first hall of columns, which leads to the second hall of columns, in turn leading to a vestibule, which in turn leads to the sanctuary. As you can see, the Temple of Abu Simbel does not follow the original sequence of the temples of ancient Egypt, as it is considered to be an exception. The entrance of the temple leads to the first hall of columns, which actually measures 20 times 18. Inside this hall are 8 Osiride sculptures decorating the 8 pillars, which are divided into 4 on either side of the first hall of columns. The 4 statues are representing King Ramesses II in Osiride form, and he is represented wearing on the northern side of the hall the double crown, while on the southern side of the hall the statues are wearing the white crown. The roof of the hall is decorated by flying vultures. The photo here represents the first hall of columns from inside. It actually shows the 4 colossal statues of the king that are decorating the 4 pillars on either side of the hall. These colossal statues represent the king in Osiride form, and each of these statues is measuring 10 meters in height. Also, you can see the king with his false royal beard and his hands crossed upon his chest, and you can see the cartouches of the king decorating his shoulders. The king is actually wearing, on the northern side he's wearing the double crown, while on the southern side he's wearing the white crown. As for the roof of the hall, it is decorated, as we said, by flying vultures. As for the decoration of the first hall of columns, it is decorated by battle scenes of King Ramesses II, who appears on every wall of this hall as a triumphant king defeating his enemies. He actually appears in the Battle of Kadesh defeating the Hittites, as he actually claimed, and he also appeared while defeating the Libyans, Nubians, and the Asiatics. Not only that, but upon the walls of the first hall of columns of the great temple, King Ramesses II also appears while making offerings to gain the blessings of different deities. The slide here shows King Ramesses II in his chariot holding the bows and arrows, and he's actually in the Battle of Kadesh, as he wanted to appear a triumphant king after claiming that he defeated the Hittites, which he actually didn't, because it was in fact a draw. But the king represented himself on the walls of his temples, the temple of Abu Simbel, as a triumphant king, defeating not only the Hittites but also the Nubians, Libyans, and Asiatics. The walls of the first hall of columns not only contained the battle scenes of Ramesses II, but it also depicted him while making offerings in front of different deities to gain their blessings. Surrounding the first hall of columns are 8 side chambers. These chambers were made in order to store the offerings for the gods, as it is confirmed by the walls of these chambers, which were depicted by scenes representing Ramesses II while making offerings to different deities. This slide here shows the interior of one of the 8 chambers. As you can see, the wall is divided into several scenes, and they all represent the same thing, Ramesses II being blessed and makes offerings in front of different deities, which confirms the fact that these 8 rooms were used for storing offerings. The first hall of columns leads to the second hall of columns, which is carved deeper into the mountain. This hall measures around 11 times 12 meters, which means that it is almost squared in shape. It contains 4 pillars, 2 on either side. The scenes decorating this hall are depicting not only Ramesses II as the first hall of columns, but this time, and for the first time in the temple, it depicts Queen Nefertari accompanying her husband in making offerings in front of different deities. At the western end of this hall are 3 doorways that lead to the vestibule of the temple. This vestibule in turn leads to the sanctuary of the temple, which is carved in the center and flanked by 2 smaller undecorated side rooms, which were used for storing the temple equipment. This slide here shows 2 of the 3 doorways that lead to the vestibule of the temple, which in turn leads to the sanctuary and the 2 side rooms flanking it. As you can see, it is decorated by scenes showing Queen Nefertari making offerings to goddess Hathor, identified by the emblem above her head. Inside the sanctuary, which is carved some 60 meters deep into the mountain, are 4 statues that are represented seated next to each other. The first statue is that of god Ptah, followed by Amun-Ra, Ramesses II deified, and lastly Ra-Horokhti. Also in the middle of the sanctuary is the remains of a pedestal which was once carrying the sacred bark that is now totally missing. The ancient engineers of King Ramesses II, who were also great architects and great astronomers, allowed the sun to enter the sanctuary twice a year. Once during the coronation day of King Ramesses II and once during his birthday, to shine 3 of the 4 statues that are located in the sanctuary. And despite the fact that the 4 statues are very close to each other, yet the sun only shines the faces of the first 3 statues. These statues were Amun-Ra, Ramesses II deified, and Ra-Horokhti, leaving Ptah in the dark, as he has the features and qualities of the god of the underworld, which means that he was meant to be left in the dark. The slide here represents the 4 gods that were carved at the back wall of the sanctuary. The first god represents Ra-Horokhti, identified by the solar disk above his head. Then you can see Ramesses II deified, followed by Amun-Ra, identified by the 2 feathers above his head, who is in turn followed by god Ptah. And despite the fact that the 4 statues are seated very close to each other, yet the ancient Egyptian astronomer, architect and engineer was able to allow the sun to only shine the faces of the first 3 statues, leaving Ptah in the dark, which means that the sun shines the faces of Ra-Horokhti, Ramesses II deified, and god Amun-Ra. This, in fact, shows the beauty of the ancient Egyptian architect, who was considered to be a phenomenon. By this, we came to the end of our presentation. Thank you all for watching.